Kicking this podcast off today, I wanted to ask you about Heinbach on YouTube. Have you seen this guy?
I think you sent me some of his videos, right?
Yeah, so he
Yeah.
is a German audio engineer, composer extraordinaire, and he is quite the character. But basically, he has just tons of analog gear, tape machines, synthesizers, and he did a studio tour this past week. And so I watched that. And I mean, like, the dude just has stuff everywhere. And so he had his wife filming him just like showing all of his toys off. And
Oh
those
yeah.
are my kind of videos. I love that stuff. So one of the things that he talked about was having an islands concept in his studio or in his office. And so you have like various islands or like sections of music making. So you would go over to this corner and you would make music with Italian synths. Like this is these kind of sounds, you know, or you go over here and this is your Euro rack island. And you go over here and this is your acoustic instruments island. And everything's patched in and ready to go for the most part. But the idea of actually moving physical locations to make different music, I really liked that. And so I've been starting to make little islands in my room. So
Nice.
I have a drum set over here, and then back behind me, I'm gonna have the pedal board and like the Novation circuit and several music making devices on the floor. So I'll just go like walk over there and sit on the floor with my guitar or with an instrument with a pickup, make some music from there, and just kind of see what happens. That's really great for ambiances or anything that you just need a lot of sound content. And then on this side, I have like a bunch of acoustic instruments, like a banjo and a dulcimer, things like that.
That's cool.
So your studio kind of has a similar thing. I mean, you like to be able to have things at an arm's length, right? But
Yeah,
you
except
you
for the
have
guitars, I have to
you
use
have to,
my
you have to get up for that.
I gotta use my Jedi mind tricks to
Nice.
pull those over
So,
there.
but you have like the Kemper on one side, right? And you can dial
Yeah.
that in, and you have some synths on the other side.
Well, actually, I don't have any hardware synths or anything. I wish.
You
The
have
only
like
thing, just
MIDI
MIDI
controllers.
controllers.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for the most part, I had an 88 key chord Triton,
Mm-hmm.
but I just ended up taking it out because I don't really use it that much. I mean, the
You're
cool
trying to
thing
sound
is,
like early 2000s rap.
yeah, come on, what? Or what's that thing like from The Office where he pushes the key? He pushes the key. He's like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
get one of those.
100%.
But yeah, I got like the main. This is like the main one, the S61 from Native Instruments. I just semi-weighted keys. It's like I use this for all of my programming in MIDI,
Uh-huh.
and then I got the machine over here. I got the Rolly C block.
Okay,
The C
nice.
block's really cool. I don't use it as much, but whenever I just want to like kind of just take my mind away from just doing something else, or if I want to more program percussion in like with my fingers, I'll use the machine. So that's like the heart of most of my like MIDI stuff. Most of it's pretty much just in the box using virtual instruments. But yeah, having the Kemper here, that just makes it really easy because it's just kind of like eye level. I used to have it down here in my rack, but yeah, that was a little kind of bring my head down to like see it.
Right.
So having it there. I mean, the guitar's on the wall. It's kind of I've always wanted to be able to like have guitars hanging and not having to like dig in through cases. So it does make it easy. Like it's funny because this side is like all like mostly like the electric guitars. I have some in a rack over here,
Okay.
but then I got like other acoustic instruments behind me. So it's kind of like divided by like electric guitars, acoustic guitars. So I guess that's like this is like metal island over here. And then I got like
There you go.
acoustic island over here.
I love that.
But yeah, the acoustic guitars are over here next to this futon. So if I just want to sit and just play or like work on some ideas or record or something, I can do that. But for the most part, that's pretty much it. I mean, this room's not too big, so I try to keep everything sort of like what do I use the most? With the
Hmm.
guitars, I mean, I could just if I'm not using them all the time, like they're just still out of the way. So that helps. But that sounds cool. I remember a long time ago when you were telling me you were gonna move, you wanted to have this kind of like cool like musical playground where you could just like kind of like
Exactly.
have all your stuff laid out. And I was like, that's cool.
Yeah, I definitely want to have stuff grabbable so that I can just, oh, I want to play mandolin on this. And it's
Hmm.
like, you don't have to think about it too long. You can just kind of grab it and start playing. So Heinbach also talked about a concept called burying the high, which I really liked as well. So Adam Neely posted a video about how isolating and lonely being a YouTuber is, and like, with the COVID pandemic and all that over the
Hmm.
past few years have been especially isolating and lonely, and how your big events are posting these videos and then it's over. Like this video you've worked on for weeks and weeks or months and months is now posted, and you hope it does well, and you've birthed the baby, so to speak, but
Hmm.
it's like now it's over, and now what? And you have that crash afterward. And
Yeah.
so he talked about just basically he was asking for advice a little bit, and like saying, with the lack of collaboration that YouTube brings most of the time, how do you celebrate your wins or your big events or accomplishments? And so
Yeah.
Heinbach posted a video in response to that called Bury the High. And he said that one of the things he likes to do is try to celebrate the big win, or like basically go out, to eat with your family or your friends or the people you worked on the project with, and take like a full night or a full day to celebrate that win, and like kind of let that over, like wash over you, and
Hmm.
actually attend the funeral of that high, like bury that high of the event, and like have your celebration, have your funeral, and then the next day, the next week, you can move on and you can go to the next thing, and your crash that comes with, something being over, can be a little bit easier. And so I really like that concept because, when you do a concert or you're working towards something really big and then it's over, that you're sitting there at a diner or whatever afterward,
Yeah.
and you're just kind of like reflecting on it, and you're like, now what?
Yeah. What now?
And I know you're gearing up for some concerts this year.
Yeah, yeah, we got a couple lined up, and it's funny you bring that up because I've always heard from people who do like touring and stuff how,
Hmm.
when they're on the road, it's like it's a completely different life. You're just going from city to city, you're seeing all this different stuff. You're like constantly sort of seeing just the road,
Yeah,
just being
yeah,
away and kind of like living it's a life that I don't think a lot of normal people can ever like relate to. You can tell people like, oh, like I travel, or people that just travel and go sightseeing, but it's like you're living this kind of gypsy life.
it's a blur. It
And
starts to be a blur. Yeah.
exactly, like every city looks the same. You see the same street names everywhere you go, and you're just like, this kind of looks like this place. Like I've
Right.
been on, on tour and seen like this looks like Riverside, or like this looks like, places that I grew up around, or that sort of thing. But then when they get home, they just go into this like depression, this
Hmm.
like post tour depression sort of thing. And yeah, it's crazy because I think it's just like, what do I do now? Or you feel like you're like constantly sort of like I think for some people it's like maybe if they're like attention seekers, or they just like enjoy like kind of performing or being in front of people. And then you come back and it's just like, now what?
Yeah.
Just kind of like depressed, like, man, like you're not living that like constant go, 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 especially if you're one of those people that need to stay busy.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, playing shows is cool. Like, I mean, most of the like anticipation is the buildup. Like right now, like we've been rehearsing and getting together. We got together a couple times for rehearsing for these shows, and it's been really cool just to like get out and jam again. Like just being in a room with three other dudes and just like, all right,
Shredding.
yeah, let's try to make this stuff sound good. And most of the time there's like way more build up. It's like working on an album, and then you finally drop it, you're like, all right, it's out there now. Like,
Yeah.
okay, like we did
Yeah.
it.
We can
So
breathe.
yeah, so like for me it's more or less like I'll be able to celebrate once we like, all right, we're out of here, like hopefully we did a good job. That's always the goal. And then after that, then it's like, all right,
Yeah.
because we have that one, and then we have another one that's a bigger one, and it's also in France. So
Oh
this will
wow.
be like a nice sort of kind of pre
Practice
live.
event.
Yeah, yeah. Like I mean, it's like not a practice, but it's a practice for it,
Yeah.
you know, because yeah, I haven't played in so long, so it's definitely it's nothing I haven't done, but when you haven't done it in a while, it's easy to kind of get a little nervous, but it's all
Get the
good. You just got to
jitters.
do it. Yeah.
But yeah, I really liked his concept of bearing the high and just taking some time to reflect on the win and getting to the top of the mountain and looking around and celebrating the whatever event it was, and then moving on. And when you wake up the next morning, he was talking about waking up with a hangover. Like it's worth it because I can just start the next project and we can be done with the previous project. I don't have to care how that video did. I don't have to care how that composition went or whatever. It's
Mhm.
on to the next thing.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a good way to approach it. I mean, because it's like I think for most people, just the saying, like what we talked about the shipping thing,
Hmm.
like that to me is like once you like put it out there into the world, it's like, all right, cool, I did it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is usually like a motivator to keep doing stuff, unless you're just getting burnt out. But yeah, people should always definitely like celebrate their wins, whether how big or small they are, is like because it's like a little motivation for you to just kind of keep going. Like, hey, like don't beat yourself up. You did it.
Yeah.
Now keep
You
doing it.
accomplished something.
You did it, kid.
So speaking of accomplishing something, Hans Zimmer has assembled the musical Avengers.
Oh yeah.
And he's everywhere.
Yeah.
He's everywhere with this Dune score right now. So he was on the Big Picture podcast. I don't know if you listen to that podcast, but they had him on. He came on to do an interview, and then he was also interviewed by Vanity Fair at a
Hmm.
recording studio, it looked like, and he had a bunch of his guest musicians pop in there. But the making of the Dune score was entirely synthesized and created a lot of new instruments or like recreated sounds, all except for the human voice. So he kept the
Hmm.
female voice as a big part. But the people he had coming in, like Tina Go, he was like, all right, can you play your cello like a Tibetan war
War
horn?
horn. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she was playing really intensely. And then he was taking her cello recordings and putting them through all kinds of convolution chambers and weird stuff to make it sound like this epic interplanet war horn.
Hmm.
He talked about, I think his name was Pedro. I should know his last name, but
The
he's a,
flautist.
yeah, he's a wind player and he was making stuff out of PVC pipes.
Yeah, that's always cool. Like when you hear stuff like that, where and that's one of the things I can always appreciate about Hans Zimmer. I mean, that guy's done so much, but his wanting to sort of reimagine things. Like he mentioned how reading the Dune book when he was a kid, not really seeing the movies or listening to the score. Or, there was, I think he said there was a TV series, and talking about how a lot of sci-fi movies were very like traditional orchestral, and it's like, well, when you think about space in the future using these like more traditional orchestral setups, it's interesting. I mean, it works, for Star Wars when you see that, but when you think about this world and like what it would sound like would it really sound orchestral?
Mm-hmm.
And I've always liked his approach and how it's like kind of seeing things outside of the box. Like I think it's very easy for people to want to go towards that, oh, like this very big orchestral cinematic sound or something.
Yeah.
But it's like, does it sound like that?
Yeah.
And I like the thing, like when he talks about using female vocals, like that's something that will stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
Instrumentation. Like, what if 10,000 years from now, like our instruments are they still gonna be around?
Sure.
What if everything just resets and it's like new instruments form or completely reimagined because they didn't know what was back then, or if everything was gone, if people started over, like would they make guitars like guitars now, or would they do it differently?
I would still be blasting the Gladiator score.
Yeah. But yeah, it was really interesting, and I like hearing that kind of artistic approach with stuff, because I would think for anyone who does film scoring, especially all the time, like yeah, everyone's got a template, but it's like you probably are like, man, I want to do something different, like especially when you have certain sounds that are very like commercially accessible to everyone, like hey, what if we like approached it like this, or made our own instruments, or using instruments in a different way than the way that they're normally used.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting.
Everyone was working from their own virtual, location. They were all working remotely through the
Yeah.
pandemic while they were doing this
Hmm.
score. So that was kind of funny too, why I said assembling the Avengers, because he's like bringing these players together who he has played with and performed with many times, and
Hmm.
he calls it his band, but it's like
Yeah.
kind of an odd group of bandmates.
Yeah, because a lot of these guys that he uses, he takes out on the road to perform his soundtracks, and
Right.
like I thought it was really interesting too, because he has Guthrie Govan, who's an amazing guitar player,
Yep.
and he was having him play these sort of like bagpipe like things on
Yeah.
the guitar. He's like, most people would probably think it's bagpipes, but it's actually my guitarist. That's a
Right.
horrible Hans Zimmer impression. I like to play in D. But
Mm.
yeah, it's just really cool. And I like that where it's what would this sound like on this instrument? Because you play it differently, or so, like if you grab a guitar and you're like, play it like a sitar, it's gonna have that sound where it's like you get it, like maybe notes wise, it's very like a sitar like,
Mhm.
but it's not gonna sound like a sitar. It's gonna sound like this. So I think that's really cool. And yeah, just like the overall artistic approach, I think was really interesting, and it's always kind of inspiring to hear stuff like that.
And the score turned out really, really nice too.
Yeah, yeah. I started watching the movie. I need to finish it. I started it at the wrong time. I started it when I was like sort of tired, and it's very like, a lot of just like open landscape and like very slow. Especially at first, it's not like a crazy action thing or something. It's very mood setting. So I was just
Yeah.
like, I can't watch this right now. I'm too tired. But it's cool so far. Yeah, definitely got to finish it.
Faux show. So I wanted to talk to you about video game music for a second. You are putting out a Soundiron session talking about a cue based on Resident Evil 7, right?
Yeah, I think by the time this comes out, the video will be out.
Sick.
But yeah, like obviously anyone who's seen my compositions know I'm a big fan of the horror genre. And this game, I played it way back when it came out, and I
When did it
remember,
come out? Like 2017, 2018?
yeah, I want to say something like that, like
Okay.
2016, 2017, maybe somewhere around there. But yeah, playing the game, it's like, I remember playing the first Resident Evil, on PlayStation when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It's like when you watch a movie, you're like, "All right, I'm turning off the lights. I'm gonna like immerse myself into this thing." And I remember just like going through the hallways because you'd walk into a door, and then you'd hear like, and you're like, "Oh god!" And then they just like grab on you, and just, you're like, "Oh god!" And you're like freaking out. This game is like that, like scare by like 1,000.
To the max. Yeah, just crank
Yeah,
the dial to full blast.
yeah, because you'll be like walking through, and then like this girl come out and she starts stabbing your hand, and you see like your hand, like you're trying to block this knife, and you're just like, oh my god, like it's so like immersive, and just like you feel like you're there.
Yeah,
And it's, yeah, and the music,
terrifying.
yeah, I really like, because the approach that they did, and I talk about this in the videos, the whole like music concrete style.
Mhm.
And I remember first hearing about that, listening to an interview by Chris Velasco, who's one of the composers on it. And I was like, music concrete? Oh, I never really heard of that. But yeah, yeah, they record a bunch of different effects and sounds, and they made this contact instrument that they can control and use it in a more sort of intuitive musical way. And I thought that was really interesting how they just kind of like took all these sounds and they gave this to like a few different composers who worked on the game.
Yeah.
And so it's like, all right, you guys all have the same palette of sounds and instruments, so it's going to sound cohesive, but everyone's going to kind of do it in their own way. And it's just a really cool score. It's a lot of like atonal and very eerie kind of sounds. And when I was working on the Strut Grand demo, I remember telling you, I was like, I think I want to do something in kind of that Resident Evil 7 style, because some of those sounds like just sort of triggered that memory for me. And I thought it'd be a fun sort of project to do. So yeah, it'll be available now on our YouTube channel if you want to check that out. I break down the whole track, show the different instruments that I used and how I sort of crafted the sound. Of course, it's not going to be, exactly like Resident Evil 7. It was kind of like my inspired version. Like if someone was to say, hey, you want to work on this thing, like this is probably what I would have tried to do, or,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So
No copyright infringements.
no copyright infringement.
But we
Yes.
were watching a video of making the sounds that they did in the game, and a lot of it was binaural. Like they had the ears, ASMR, except opposite, except horror ASMR. So they had, they were like rubbing a bass drum, and they were moving the ears around, like spinning the ears. And you can just imagine if you're wearing headphones while you're playing this game, you have this constant just vertigo of chaos going on inside the space.
Yeah, because you think about it, it's like that's probably how you would feel if you were in this world, just like constantly, like every little sound would probably like freak you out. You hear like creaking in the house, like, because one of the things they also talk about other than the music is like a lot of the natural ambience sounds that they used
Yep.
to really make you feel like you're in that environment. And that plays a huge role, especially for anyone who does, audio for movies. So a while back, one of the indie studios I did with Derek Vanderhorst, he was talking about how he did all the sound and stuff for movies, which is like, that's a really great episode for anyone who maybe is into audio production and mixing for movies, because it's not really composer based. Like he talks
Hmm.
about how he layers the music, but it's really interesting how there's so many tracks of like cricket sounds and then like natural wind and then like metal clanking, like all these like Foley sounds that they use to make you feel like you're there. Because everything that you hear, it's like watching a movie where they're in a club,
Yep.
there's no music playing. It's literally just quiet and they're just like, "What? I can't hear you." And then they put all the sounds of people talking and partying and music and people drinks hitting the table, like all that stuff. It's really interesting how
Put
how
in
they do
in
all that
post.
stuff. Yeah, and they made an importance to really craft that for this game too, and like yeah, just everything about it. It's just like, if you like playing scary games, that's one to play. I haven't played any of the newer ones. That's probably the last one that I've played. I
How many
don't
are there?
uh shoot. I think they came out with a couple other ones. I think they did one of the more recent ones I saw was like Resident Evil The Village or
Oh, okay.
Village or something like that. I know they've also, I think, done some remakes of some of the older ones too.
The Dead Space series was that for me, where I was
Yeah.
listening, playing with headphones on and just being terrified while I was playing. But you can't stop playing because you're like, I have to survive. But in real life, I would just go ahead and die. I would just give up.
You're like, I'm just gonna jump out of this spaceship. It's so funny because like Jason Graves, like we've had him on the podcast. He was one of the first first or second people I started interviewing on the podcast. And he's just like the nicest guy.
Totally.
And you're like, what's wrong with you? Why are you making all these
You
like
have a double
terrifying
life.
sounds? Yeah, like what's going on in that head, man? Because like you're not a scary guy at all. I mean, his last name is Graves. And on the Until Dawn soundtrack, that's the one that another score that he did that I really like. It's horror based as well. And he was like, because he was saying how like, I don't know, I'm not really like, I'm not like a scary guy, but I think I just get hired maybe because like for these games because my last name is Graves.
Right.
But yeah, it's just it's funny. Imagine some like crazed maniac who's like just sitting in this dungeon just making all these scary sounds, but
He's a
but
family man. He has a YouTube
yeah.
channel and he shows like some breakdowns of the Dead Space music,
Hmm.
kind of like recording cellos and detuning and making contact groups and stuff. So you should check that out if you haven't already. But he seems like not someone who would play the games.
Yeah. Or maybe playing, but like yeah, when you see the making the music, it's very interesting because you're like, man, like I would not think you would make this. But that's
Yeah.
cool though.
But a similar game that I'm always trying to get you to play is BioShock.
Yeah.
So they used a ton of sound effects and Foley, and the composer, Gary Scheinman, is a professor at USC.
Oh, cool.
And I believe he won a BAFTA for the BioShock soundtrack, but it opens the game with Somewhere Beyond the Sea, like the jazz tune. And then it just like slowly morphs into this like horrorscape. And it's like,
Mm,
it like goes with the cutscene that you're playing as the opening of the game, and you don't really know what's going on. But it's the most immersive soundtrack of all time for me. Like it just sucks you
yeah.
right in, and you can't stop playing the game.
Oh wow. Yeah. I don't play video games as much as I would like these days. I think I have this thing that like makes me feel bad for playing video games. I feel like should I be like doing something else? Should I be working on some music or practicing or something?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the last game that I started playing, I was playing Final Fantasy VII Remake because I'm a huge Final Fantasy nerd.
Nice.
And I started playing it was this game called Evil Within,
Okay.
and that game is wild, man. Like
I haven't heard of
it's
it.
yeah, it's a trip. Like it's one of those games that it's almost like this like acid trip or something, like this horror acid trip where like you're going into this room and then everything changes and then there's like these like crazy monsters that come out. It's just yeah, it's wild. It's a really cool game. I've never really played anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it screws with you because you're like, what's going on? Like you go into this room and then everything just like changes and yeah, it's wild. Dark acid dream. I don't know.
Sounds intense.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is Christian Henson's YouTube channel.
Mhm.
He posted a video on how not to give up. And he was talking about specifically as like a film and game composer. And he said the biggest way to not give up is just to keep going and pushing through, and you can take breaks. So like the three things I wrote down were pivots, diversification and a hiatus. And he said, like, just because you take a hiatus from creating music doesn't mean that you lost or that it's over forever. So
Hmm.
you can take breaks, you can go make a bunch of money and save your pennies, so to speak, and you can come back to it. And as long as people know that you're still doing music, like eventually the phone will ring again.
Yeah.
And diversification was the biggest one for me because he was talking about learning other skills. Like you should know how to market. You should know how to sell. You should know how to code a website or how to make yourself valuable to other people.
Hmm.
And the more that you can diversify your interests and diversify your skill set, the better off you're going to be in an industry that is like shrinking. And then pivoting, he was talking about pivoting to slightly different topics or slightly different interests, like going from composing for VR to making ambiances for a sample company. That would
Hmm.
be a pivot. And he talked about how he used to be composing primarily for TV and for movies, and then he
Hmm.
pivoted to Spitfire. Like Spitfire was a pivot, and it was a very successful pivot, obviously. But the more that you can pivot and shift what your focus is on, you can pick up new skills and you can learn, and then you can apply those things to making a more holistic person or a holistic career.
Yeah. Oh, that's very important. And I think it keeps you on your toes when you're not just doing one thing. Cause I think when you put all your eggs in one basket and things aren't moving quite the way that you want, it's very easy to just almost want to like stop or give up.
Yeah, and he
And
he was saying like the road to success is littered with people who give up. You get knocked down 10 times, you get up 11 is the idea.
yeah, and like there's nothing wrong with doing something for a long time, especially like, and I think I kind of developed a thick skin for this kind of thing just from, growing up and playing in bands. Like the first band I was in didn't get signed. Like, should I have stopped? Like, oh, I guess it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
From there, like my pivot was learning how to play drums. I was like, well, if I'm not going to have a band, well, I need to learn how to play drums so I can make my own music.
Nice.
Later on, I discovered that you can program drums. And I was like, okay, well, this is a lot easier. But the cool thing is I spent a lot of time actually trying to learn how to play drums. I could apply that to programming drums.
And it
Then you
helps with
can,
rhythm for sure.
yeah, like it's just, and that's just another skill. Like you're learning that thing. So, when you have a band again or something, you can communicate these ideas way easier. You're not just saying, hey, can you go, it's like, I don't know what that means. I don't know. So just because one thing maybe doesn't work out, like use that as an opportunity for maybe learning some new skills or doing something, because most of the time, any successful people you talk to, like, this wasn't an overnight thing. Like maybe for some people it is, but a lot of people don't see the behind the scenes.
Yeah,
A lot of times,
people's overnight success took 10 years.
yeah, like most people just, you just see people posting their wins all the time. And you're like, man, like they got it so easy. I wish and it's like, well, you're not seeing the hours and hours of time that they're going and working on the stuff. Like Christian Henson's one of those guys. He's a human workhorse. He's just always
He's a
doing stuff.
grinder.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and that's something to take inspiration from. It's like, he's like, I like one thing I've heard from him say where he was like, there might be people out there that are more skilled than me when it comes to, technical skill, but they're not going to outwork me. And I'm like, that's another way to approach it, especially like it's not like to have this thing of like, I'm going to, to be mad about it or like, no one, but it's like, that's one thing that you can control, like how much time that you dedicate to your craft. Like
Yeah.
that's something that like, just because someone else is get maybe really, let's say, amazing on piano, it's like, all right, well, I'm not really trying to do that. Like, yeah, that's cool, but maybe your goal is a different thing. Like, don't always just see because someone is like super successful or skilled in one thing that you shouldn't even try, or maybe that's not your thing. Like Gary Vee talks about, focus on your strengths and stuff like that. Like that's things to also like, not to say that you shouldn't work on things that need work, but if you're not Adele and you can't sing like Adele, like, well, what's your thing? There's already an Adele, kind of thing like that. Like there's no point in trying to like completely copy someone else. Plus you're just going to get lost in the fog. So
Lost in the noise. Yeah, and if you're banging your head against the wall, there's a good chance that you should find something else to do for a while. Like if you're trying to be an opera singer during COVID, Like there's not a lot of opera happening. So you should probably have a pivot in that
Hmm.
moment, and you should go explore how to market or how to learn a different skill.
Yeah. What let me ask you, what do you think is like your like a pivot that you made that was like a pretty big one that sort of like changed the direct, your trajectory of your sort of, your career, or your life?
I would say the biggest pivot was learning what I don't like. And so doing several TV and film gigs, orchestration, behind the scenes work that involve creative process but are not composing. And
Hmm.
then composing for people who I didn't have a good relationship with and not understanding the relationship pragmatist side of the business and thinking that film composing was like this glorious art form where you create something holy and you hand it to them and you say, now go and use this.
Hmm.
And I would say my big pivot was pivoting from freelance music composing to finding a job with Soundiron
Hmm.
that definitely flows better with my skill set. It's
Yeah.
a much more technical, much more entrepreneurial, autonomous job. And the person I report to is a complete expert in their field
Hmm.
and they understand what I'm doing and what I should be doing.
Hmm.
Whereas a lot of the times when you're working with a director, they don't understand music at all and they can just barely tell you that they don't like what you're doing. And
Yeah.
the direct communication that you miss out on if you're working on a Craigslist gig is huge. So I've done some gigs that were really fun and I've done several more gigs that were not fun at all for me. And so
Yeah.
pivoting from just taking any, like saying yes to any music composing gig that came my way,
Hmm.
pivoting from that to only occasionally composing music for a client and typically just composing music for either Soundiron or for my own
Yeah.
love of the game has been a huge win for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. There's beauty in, like you said, finding what you don't like to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people learn this the hard way when they go to college. And
Mm,
I'm not one of those people that's going to tell you don't go to college. For me, I always felt like the school structure didn't really work too well for me. Like when I was in school, I did pretty poorly because I just didn't pay attention. I wasn't interesting to me. I wanted
sure.
to go home and play guitar. Like guitar band, A+ every time.
Right.
Math, trash. But it's like, but I knew like it's funny, it wasn't until I got out of school to where I really started exploring more of like the things that like I was into. Like I hated PE, but then I started getting into working out
Yeah.
and like not like bodybuilding, but like, trying to approach it in a more serious way. And
Sculpting.
yeah, how do you get the sculpting? But I would try to apply what the way I structured practicing guitar and using sort of like, okay, like, because a great way to start building a new skill set is to use your approach for things that you've been successful at. So,
Right.
I would map out all my practicing and stuff, and then I would try to apply that to this. But yeah, like finding the things you don't like is in all right, like that's a win. Or if you try something and you learn like what not to do, that's also a win in itself.
Exactly. And
Um,
you know how people make priority lists of like, okay, I want to spend my time this way. If you flip that on its head and make an anti list of things you don't want to be spending your time doing,
mhm.
one of them for me was working in Finale or any sort of notation software. Like
Oh yeah.
if that's the job, I don't want it.
Yeah, I would be horrible because I'm trash when it comes to like reading notation.
Hmm.
Like anytime I've ever tried to, like maybe I should learn this because it almost sounds like this kind of like, oh, you can't read music. Like, I mean,
Sure.
guitar tablature, yeah, but it's like sometimes for some people it almost sounds like it's like a you hang your head in shame, like yeah, I can't, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't make music. Like it's just like everyone does it in their own way. There's plenty of amazing musicians who wrote music that don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like
Just
I
because you
just
can't notate it on a piece of paper.
yeah, or explain it like, oh, so because I've had guitar students who would like ask me about music, like, oh, like what key or what were you thinking about this? Like, I don't know, just
Right.
I move my hands around until I settle on something and make it happen. But I like for me, I think a big pivot was because at one point I wanted to tour and make that my thing,
Yeah.
just making music and traveling,
Playing live.
and it's not until I did it that I was like, I don't really like this that much.
Well, there are so many
You
parts
know?
to it that aren't actually playing the music, right?
Yeah, like there's 30 minutes where you are set up, you play, and then there's another, 23 and a half hours of just like standing around or sitting or driving, or maybe you're not making a lot of money. That's the other thing. I mean, if like it's very tough. So
Yes.
like I felt very kind of like, man, like did I just like fail at this thing? Like did it just not work out? But like when I quit, I was just kind of like, I need to like this isn't really for me.
Hmm.
But from then on, I made that pivot into doing more like home studio stuff, because the band I was in, the main guy was like, hey, I need you to be able to start recording DIs, because he had like tendonitis issues.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, well, I don't like, I've done like home production stuff before, like, but it's like little just kind of BS pre-production. But that made me like, all right, I'll get a computer, I'll get an interface, start learning how to do that kind of thing. But then from there, I just fell in love with it. And it just
Yeah.
kind of like all my free time went to just learning, because you start like, all right, I just want to learn how to record a DI track. And then you're like, oh, I want to like try to get good tones. Oh, I want to learn how to like mix a kick drum. Oh, I want to like try to learn how to like mix and master. Oh, I want to, just because you just want to make your stuff sound good. It's like a natural evolution of like, you start doing something like, oh, what if I could try to like make it sound like this, or
Yeah, your ear has better taste than your actual skills.
yeah. And it's just, and you listen back to old mixes, you're like, oh my God, what was wrong with me? But
Mhm.
by making that change, like I don't know if I ever would have started, doing this, and my girlfriend is a big factor in that too, because she was always very supportive and very just like, because like sometimes you're like, I don't know, like I kind of want to try doing this thing, but it's like
Sure.
you should do it, very motivating and pushing me to doing stuff as well. So I'm always very grateful to her. And
Shout out to Craig's girlfriend.
shout out, you got to have a support system. And yeah, so I think a lot of people are like, oh, but you were touring and doing this, like why wouldn't you want to do that? Why would you quit? Because we had the chance to do a couple pretty good tours, but it's not what I want to do. Like I like being home, I like working on music. Like
Hmm.
I could work on music whenever I want. I don't need five guys sitting in here being like, well, let's do this. Like I can
You don't
kind of
have
do
to
whatever I want.
drive. You don't have to drive to Ohio in order to
Yeah, and
play.
like load up gear and doing all this, so I mean it's cool. I mean, like with the shows we're doing, like that's cool. That's like it's fun to do that like later on, because
Hmm.
it's like a nice break, almost like a hiatus from touring and playing live. It's not like I'll never do it again. It's just like I'm going on a different path.
For sure.
And that sort of, I guess, failure kind of turned into something that changed my life. Like I probably wouldn't have been here if I was still trying to pursue that. I'd probably be sleeping on some dude's floor in Wisconsin. Like, all right, really, we're going to play in like a couple hours, like, but I wouldn't change it.
I love it. Love it, dude. Well, do you have any recommendations for this week? I can go first
Yeah.
on we're talking any YouTube videos, podcasts, TV, movies, anything that we have enjoyed in the last week. For me, I just started watching Abbott Elementary on Hulu, and it is a show about a Philadelphia elementary school, and it's focused on the teachers, and it's basically like a very poverty-stricken sector, and they're just trying to grind it out and make ends meet, and it's The Office but in an elementary school. So it does all like the on-camera interviews and back talking and all kinds
Mhm.
of like jump cuts and stuff. Very, very funny and really, really cleverly written. That would be one. And then I would say go subscribe to Jason Graves' YouTube channel if you're a composer, because he's putting gold out there.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation. If you haven't checked out his YouTube channel, you should, because it's funny. When I first got to do the podcast with him, he was just on the brink of announcing it. I remember he was teasing it and stuff, and he
Mm-hmm.
was like, "Yeah, I want to do this YouTube channel," and he was talking about some of the ideas that he wanted to do, and I was like, "Well, I can't wait to see it." So since then it's been out, and he's just been putting out tons of killer content, and just really doesn't hold back any sort of information. Like
Yeah,
he
he's giving
literally
out
gave
the secret
out,
sauce.
yeah, like my Metagrid, like using that was a huge inspiration from him.
Yeah.
I would also recommend Metagrid for anyone who doesn't know what that is, they actually just came out with a new Metagrid Pro. I haven't really had a chance to explore it too much, but it's a game changer, man. Like it's kind of like the iPad version of like Stream Deck,
Right.
but there's just like some, like you can do multiple pages, you can have all kinds of key commands, you can have it change with different applications you have open. So if I click on Cubase, like the Cubase one will load up. If I am doing video editing and I select DaVinci key commands will show up. So it's very like, it works like side by side. But yeah, he gave away his entire Metagrid. Like if you go to his Patreon, it's like you sign up for $1 and you can get all kinds of cool extra stuff, project files and like Metagrid files of, all his setup. And like, I just like watched his video to learn about it and kind of like modified it to fit my own workflow. But man, like, you talk about the secret sauce and just giving it away. He's just like, just goes to show, what an awesome guy he is, that he is just like, hey, I did all the hard work for you, just go give him a subscribe, subscribe to his channel. It's the least you can do.
Absolutely. So
yeah,
we will be having a guest on next week to talk about Spotify cheat codes. Very exciting. And in the meantime, you should subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out Craig's Soundiron session on Resident Evil 7 inspired cues. And you should subscribe to our podcast because we are going to keep rolling these things out.
Yep. Subscribe, leave us a review. It helps us out. If you're on YouTube, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. It's easy.
It's easy. It's easy.
It's easy. Anyone can do it.
It's the least you could do, as Craig said.
Yeah. Come on.
What are you waiting for? Just press it
already. Yeah.
All right, Craig. I will catch you next week, my man.
All right. Till next time.